completely fine. This is just that the horse had no idea what was going on and could not understand what she was trying to convey. It's just that the whole training was off. There was no proper training that conveyed the information clearly to the horse, so he had no idea what she wanted, and she kept changing trainers. She had one trainer, one after the other, different ones, who had different methods and different things, and the horse was completely confused and couldn't understand what was going on. So that's why the horse really wanted to please. So that was layer 1. But layer 2, there's a lot of layers in communication. Layer below was that there was something going on with her mother. And there was something going on for her with her mother that had to do with being perfect. And being perfect meant being loved and being appreciated. And that meant being worthy enough of being loved. And it was completely related to her mother, and that had to do with the behavior of the horse. That's all I had. I had no other information. I couldn't figure out what it meant. I had no idea. But I just knew it had to be something about perfection and something with cleanliness. Being clean, perfect, pure, something like that. Those were the words I had. I had no idea. So I explained to the woman, and I start explaining the layer 1. I say, this is what's going on with the trainers, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't understand. That's the classic first layer. But then I go into the other details. And so I'm actually thinking to myself while I'm talking, should I take her aside and talk about it? Because I don't want people, they all break down and cry and stuff. So I was like, maybe I should take her aside. So I said, well, there's just something related to your mother that has to do with you being perfect. And if you want, we'll talk about it after class. But at that moment, she burst out in tears. And she said in front of the whole class, so she had guts. She said, I understand what you're talking about. She said, when I was a kid, my mom used to make me clean up the house, spick and span, all the time. When I would come up from school and I had to clean and clean and clean and clean. And because it was never clean enough, she would beat me up or she would lock me in cupboards for hours. And the mother was very abusive. And if not, she said, one day my mom came back and I had cleaned the house for hours and I was afraid because I was afraid of being beaten. And the mom came, she walked into the house and she took the ashtray and she poured the ashtray on the floor and she said, you see, it's not clean. And so she locked her up in the cupboards. So at that point, obviously everyone was crying, including me. And at that point, I realized that I had been judgmental because I had taken the side of the horse because I like horses a lot. And I was pissed off at her because she wasn't treating the horse right and she wasn't understanding the horse. But I realized that I was the one being judgmental also amongst all the others, and that I hadn't understood, and that we never ever really understand a person. And we never really know what's going on, and we never know their lives, and we never know who they are. And that's what's causing our judgment. And so after that, it was difficult. We talked, and I asked her if she would consider therapy. And I said, would you consider letting your horse roll in the dirt? And just saying that, it completely freaked her out because of the cleanliness issue. So that's why her horse always had to be perfect, because she put everything she transferred, all the things she had inside of her were transferred on about perfection, meaning being worthy, meaning being loved, were transferred onto the horse. And the horse had to always be spick and span and perfect and do everything right, which is impossible because no one can do everything right. And especially if a horse doesn't know what's going on and doesn't understand, he can't do things right, what we think is right. It's nothing to do, for them nothing is right or wrong. For them, they just want to be. They just want to live and to be. The whole idea of notion of right and wrong is completely human. And we transfer, what's the word I use in French? We project our whole notions of right and wrong and stuff on animals, which they don't even have. They have no clue about all of that. So I never found out what happened to this woman. I know she did therapy. I know she did it, but I never found out if she followed through with the horse. So those are the cases of absorbing. It's much more than what we think. It's much more than what we think because they're very sensitive I'm not saying that they absorb everything at all, because imagine if not all the animals would be sick, you know, because we have issues, everyone. We all have issues. I'm not saying all animals absorb, but I'm saying that the absorbing is specifically the cases that are hidden, the things that are not expressed. This is what I have found from my experience. I'm not saying it's the truth. It's only what I have discovered. So, are you ready to talk about death?
Yeah.
Before we take questions? Or you want to do questions before death? Maybe you should ask questions before you die. So, I will take a few questions. You wanted?
Well, my question also relates to death, because your first case was about a mare who had lost a foal.
Yes.
And was looking for the foal.
Yes.
And then you mentioned that you had communicated to the mare that the foal was stillborn.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what kind of images did you project to show the mare that the foal was stillborn?
Yes.
And did you possibly project anything? I mean, does reincarnation come up in your, that may be something
Yes.
that you're getting to.
I won't get to reincarnation actually, yeah, but yes, go ahead.
But one other subject, just a quick comment.
Yeah.
What you're describing in terms of animals acting out the problems in communication in their families and their guardians, it just almost seems to be straight out of psychology textbooks for dealing with children who are identified as the IP, the identified patient.
Yes.
Particularly in the work of Virginia Satir, like her book Conjoint Family Therapy, which is a milestone in family counseling. The child who is identified as the problem child is the one who is acting out the problems in the family. So to heal the child, it is necessary to do family therapy.
Yes, yes.
So that seems to be something that your work
I suppose it would be, yeah.
is really bringing up. But once again, I'm just fascinated. I'm a professional psychic and astrologer myself. I'm fascinated by the vocabulary that you would use to acquaint an animal with the nature of death.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. You would have to do it with the way, with your perception, because it's going to go through everything that is you and your perception. So I present the image, a physical sense of death, because the animal, the stillborn was taken away right away, so she didn't have time to see or to realize. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't have time. But then what happens for the after, it would be presented within my experiences with the spirit world. So everyone's experiences would be completely different. Yeah, and about reincarnation, the reason why I will not talk about reincarnation is because most of my teaching is in Europe, and I completely avoid the theme of reincarnation because it's not the same as California at all. As you know, she's French. It's very, very Cartesian.
Oh, yeah.
And because I want to bring this to professionals, to trainers and veterinarians, and I want to present it as a real language, even though it's intangible, but something that's within the intangible is something real. I completely avoid the theme of reincarnation because it's related to beliefs, and what I believe in that case doesn't matter. So I don't even allow my students to talk about reincarnation.
One quick follow-up question. When you speak about transferring images, projecting images into the animals, I'm wondering whether or not there also isn't a certain amount of tactile feeling energy, which is non-visual, which is attached to the images. Looking at it from an NLP or neuro-linguistic programming point of view, there may be things that you're doing that you're not describing, but that are intuitive, that are like hypnotic or like dealing with metaphors or dealing with speeded up visual processes or dealing with cognates that are connecting the emotional to the visual. And I would be fascinated if one day you were able to describe those more. Perhaps you do in the training.
In the training we go much more in details, but I'm very careful because, as I said before, it's very important for me. This is like become something really important because of the death of so many animals. that to make sure the language is transmitted in a pure way, that is kept, it keeps its purity, and that people don't start saying nonsense. For example, like nonsense would be, these are not dangerous nonsense, but these are things like, oh, well, your animal can't go to the light because he hasn't done this course or that course, or, nonsense things like this, or like asking your dog, does your dog want to commit suicide? The dog doesn't want to commit suicide. No animal is going to want to commit suicide. And things that they say, oh, I feel your dog wants to be euthanized, or your dog wants to do Reiki, or your dog wants to do this. I mean, you don't even know the crazy stuff I've heard. I'm not saying it now. They talk about reincarnation and things that they have no way of knowing. But the problem with that, I don't care if people say nonsense, that's fine, everyone's allowed to say nonsense. But the problem is that it puts the life of animals in danger. And it's the opposite of what we're trying to do in communication, which is to help them and to save lives. So I'm very specific about that language. But in the training, we do go more in depth in that.
So in other words, you really work on speaking the animal's language in terms that it understands. In the process of doing this, you develop an understanding of their visual emotional vocabulary.
Exactly.
Is that?
Yes, exactly.
Is that correct? Laila is your name?
Laila.
Laila.
Yeah.
Which is related to Lily. Lilith. Do you know Lilith?
Lilith.
Is symbolic of the sorceress.
Yes, I know who Lilith is with the red hair. Yes, I
know.
know.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laila.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and that's why we teach when we do the teaching. There's a very specific technique that I ask them to stay with, to hold to, so it gives them a frame, so they don't start going into fantasy, and a very I don't like using the word strict, but I have no other way of using it. Decoding of the information, so that there's not projecting the emotions of the human being, because people right away they how do you say a priori?
Anthropomorphize. Is that what you were like?
No.
Well, anthropomorphize is projecting human qualities into an animal.
That's it. There's that, but a priori means
Or a priori.
How?
Without support from evidence.
Yes, that's it. Prejudgment.
Yeah.
Yes. What? You project a thing that you've just decided.
Well, without substance.
That's it. That's it.
Prejudice.
Yes, prejudice. So the whole point of when we do the communication is to stay within the framework of the technique, so that the language is pure and is free of the most possibly the emotions and the feelings of the person who's doing it, of the student in that case.
I notice in your book you also say the first step is to purify oneself.
I believe so, but those are again my beliefs. To me, it's still a belief. But to me, animal communication is something. It's a path. It's a spiritual path to me, but it doesn't have to be like that at all. It could be done without being a spiritual path. Yeah. Any other questions?
So when you're doing animal communication, one of the challenges is always the human, right? Because you're a translator effectively, yeah?
Yes.
And I wonder how you, two questions. Number one, how you bridge that, because for me it's a spiritual process too, and I'm wondering how you bridge that gap. Part of it, as I'm hearing you explain it, is that you don't go into like la land,
no,
reincarnation, you back it up with evidence.
Yeah.
But how to even connect with the humans who don't always, who don't even buy into it. I mean,
Yes.
you understand?
Oh,
This
it's
is like
very
a huge
simple.
gap.
Yes. Oh, no, it's not so huge. No, because you see what happens is when you have something that they have no way of knowing, that you have no way of knowing, and that you're telling them. For example, the other day, the woman, she was trying to get the horse in the van, and I said specifically, I said, well, he's leaving behind, there's a horse that's white, and he's scared of leaving that horse behind. That's why he's not going in the van, and it happened to him, blah, 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 well, 5 years ago. Stuff that I have no way of knowing. So then even someone who's completely Cartesian, they're like, oh yeah, it's true. It's a validation. I give them concrete evidence. That's why I don't go into La La Land. I don't say, your dog has the energy of a hawk, and cosmic blah, blah, blah. I don't go into any of that stuff. Because I stick to down-to-earth things that are tangible, the most possible, that people relate, that they know it's true, that they've experienced.
Yeah. And so then the second part of the question, even more important, is that when you're dealing, this maybe will come up in that part, but when you're dealing with that human-animal bond, particularly with family, pets, they're, to so many of us, they're family members, and I'm wondering how you deal with humans who, like in my case, who are dealing with their grieving and their guilt associated
Yeah.
with some of these,
Yes.
because yes, right?
I know exactly.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. With the communication, I'll come to it. Yes. If there's a situation where there's a lot of grief, the communication it will help to relieve the guilt. If there's a situation where there's a lot of guilt, sorry, we'll talk about grief in a second. The guilt is because of something. It's related with the animal and it could be related to something else. So the explanation helps to relieve the feeling of the guilt for the person. And the grieving is always going to be there. The grieving, look, even when you know that I don't say I know the spirit world, but I've had a lot of experiences with spirit world. So
Yeah.
I have no doubt that there's life after, and I have no doubt about a lot of things after. But even with all of that, when I lost my cat,
Yeah.
I just cried. I mean, he knows David, he knows me. I cried for a week. I couldn't even function.
Yeah.
And grieving is normal. You have to grieve because you're losing the body. Even if the soul is, you know that the soul continues to exist. Okay, soul is a bit of a religious term, at least in French, but spirit. Let's use the word spirit instead of soul. So even if the spirit we know, and you know with certainty, or you've read 1,000 books that talk about it, and you're hoping that it's true, that what they're saying is true, whatever it is, even if you have just an intellectual knowledge that it could possibly be true, the grieving is there because it's the loss of the immediate love.
It's a sense of separation.
Yeah.
But so even if I could just ask a little more.
Yes.
Because even from this is just my personal experience. We're not even here. We're all vibration. This is not even real, effectively, from my personal knowing and personal experience. And so it's just my perception of separation from my pet and my own grief. But I'm just wondering how, even in my own work, how I can, for my own self and for others when I work with them, it's the communication enough. Even the knowing is not enough.
It's not enough.
Relieve the guilt.
It relieves the guilt. The guilt, it does relieve a lot. Look, so I'll come to one case. I'll explain to you this one case. Shatsi, Michigan, a dog. Okay, she had terminal cancer for a long time. So we worked on her. We had to survive quite a few years and all that. Then all of a sudden, okay, I go to France. I come back and the woman calls me and she says, could you do a communication with Shatsi? So I thought that she wanted me to talk with her. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And then she says, oh, but she's passed. So I was surprised because she was actually doing okay even though she had cancer. And she says, well, we had to euthanize her. She didn't tell me why. She just said, could you talk to her and ask her if she was ready to go? That's all she told me. So I do the communication with Shatsi, and the information that comes through is that she didn't want to go at all. She was absolutely not ready to go. And it was very strong, because usually you don't hear that, but it was very strong. I wasn't ready to go, but tell her that to let go of the grief, of the guilt. Tell her to let go of the guilt, and tell her, okay, tell her is not the right words because it's a word, but you understand what I'm saying. Express to her that she has to trust her own feelings. That's all I have. She has to trust her own feelings. So I talked with the woman in Michigan that I knew very well. I won't say her name. And she said, well, so what happened is when we brought Shatsi to the vet, she was fighting. She didn't want to go.